Welcome to the 30/30 Health Podcast. The following discussion is for education and entertainment. It is not intended to diagnose or treat disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first discussing it with your doctor. Here is your host, Guillermo Ruiz.
Hello everyone, my guest today is Don Matez. Don has been on a lifelong quest since the age of 13 to realize his full physical, mental, and spiritual potential. Along the way, he has conducted long self-experiments with both animal and plant-based diets, including both strictly carnivorous all the way to strictly plant-based diets. Don maintains an oriental medicine practice in Scottsdale, Arizona, barefoot acupuncture. He also has a website dedicated to helping people realize their full potential, fullrangestrength.com. I hope you enjoy the show, and remember, visit my website 3030strong.com where you can keep up with all my adventures. Don, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Before we start this interview, can you tell us about how you found this ancestral movement and what's your hero story?
Basically, you could call it part of my hero story. Like I've been on a lifelong quest to realize my physical, mental, and spiritual potential, whatever that is. And so along the way, I've tried a lot of different nutritional strategies, both to improve my health and to improve my performance. And just prior to discovering the ancestral approach, we talk about like sudden changes, but nothing is ever really sudden. It's a gradual change, right? So for years, I had been following a lacto-ovo-vegetarian diet from the time I was maybe about 20, 21, something like that. And then that kind of evolved into trying the macrobiotic diet, which kind of dovetailed with my interest in Oriental philosophy and Oriental medicine. But along the way, that never really worked really well for me. So it worked well and it didn't work well. I mean, there's some things that improved, some things that didn't. And we can get into that later if you want. I'm trying to be as objective about my own experience as I can, which is a difficult thing to do, right? So to cut this into a nutshell, I had been following a macrobiotic diet for a while, but I'd read the Paleolithic Prescription, and I'd read Weston Price's book a couple of times, and experimented a little bit while macrobiotic, because macrobiotic isn't strictly vegetarian. I'd experimented with some of the suggestions or ideas that I'd gotten from Weston A. Price, and then I discovered the book Neanderthin. I actually was advertised in the back of a Vegetarian Times magazine. Can you believe that? And I sent away from it because whatever the blurb was that Ray Audet had put in there, it just captured my attention. I got that book, and that even though I had read the Paleolithic Prescription before, it didn't click enough to make me want to do it. But when I read Neanderthin, I said, I gotta try this because there's some things that just don't suit me with this highly plant-based diet. So that's how I got into the ancestral eating approach.
I'm trying to figure out who wrote the Boyd Eaton.
Boyd Eaton, Melvin Connor, Boyd Eaton, and Shostak. Marjorie Shostak, yeah.
And around what time, what's the time frame? I'm trying to draw a little timeline for my listeners. What year is this?
Yeah, let's see. This is about, must be around late 80s, early 90s. I'm going to say around 88, something like that. I can't.
1988, yeah, because on some of your comments, I went back and did some homework from this podcast, and you said a couple of times, I've been doing this diet for 14 years, and this is in 2010.
Right.
So you had been through the fire, and then all of a sudden, fast forward to 2006, 2007, the internet is rampant. And then around 2008, if I'm not mistaken, there's a New York Times article on a bunch of little hipsters in New York City that want to live like cavemen, and they created a paleo meetup group. What a lot of people don't know is that Phoenix had a paleo meetup group before that New York group.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I started it.
Yeah, it's so funny, because John Durant was the subject of that article back in 2008, 2000. I'm not. I'll make sure to put a little link to that article because I remember my friend brought it and I was reading it, and there was a couple of cool looking dudes with long hair eating raw meat,
Yeah, right.
And I was like, that looks so cool. And I had just read Good Calorie, Bad Calorie, and the Paleo Solution by Rob Wolf was about to be published in a year or two. And that was like the epicenter of what now has become a worldwide movement. So back in those days, we had a different prescription for paleo. There was a lot of debate whether, when Cordain came up with his book, it was a low fat or lower saturated fat. And then you started your blog, Primal Wisdom. And that was just a force of nature. Can you talk about how did you go about researching when there was so little material to put out?
Originally, I think I called it Primal Wisdom, but then I changed it later to Vital Wisdom, which is the current name. But how did I get started with that? Well, I just started writing. I think my first article was a response to John McDougall's something he'd written about vitamin B12 and his suggestion that vitamin B12 that people got in the past, if I remember right, it was only through contact with animals. It wasn't from eating the animals. It was from contact with animals in the farmyard or something. I don't know. I don't remember the details right now. I'd have to go back and read it because it was so long ago. But
it was by osmosis.
Yeah. But so I think at that time I was already teaching for Southwest Institute of Healing Arts and also SCNM. And so at SCNM, you have as an assistant professor or adjunct professor, you got library privileges. So I just started, checking out articles that I wanted to read that had been cited by S. Boyd Eaton in the Paleolithic Prescription, or by Audette in his book, or anything that those led to. Like every article you read has references. So if something looks interesting in the references, I pick up on that and follow the trail. My goal always was to find what is actually, substantiated, and what is just so story about Paleolithic, what our ancestors ate.
What makes sense evolutionarily, and
exactly,
and which fairy tale do you want to believe?
Yeah, right.
Because it's so nice, sometimes to have these expectations of something, and then you create that bias, and the more you dig, you start digging for that bias instead of staying objective. So let's divert a little bit. You worked at SCNM. What were you doing for SCNM? Were you helping with the acupuncture part of things?
No, I was an adjunct professor in the nutrition department at the time. I taught history of nutrition and detoxification. That was I think it was the first course that students were required to take in the nutrition program.
But your background is with acupuncture.
Yeah. I have a master's in acupuncture and Oriental medicine, and board certified.
Can you talk a little bit about traditional Chinese medicine and how there's like something with dampness and eating too many vegetables or eating too much meat, and there has to be some balance? Yeah,
well, basically, I try to understand everything through analogies. So, dampness is, to the best of my understanding, the way I interpret it, it's the concept in Chinese medicine is it's excessive fluid, kind of like a sponge is supposed to be moist, but it's got a little bit too much moisture in it. So that excess moisture is impairing normal metabolism, and it's also a byproduct of impaired metabolism. Basically, your metabolism from a Chinese medicine perspective, if you super simplify it, it's a relationship between the fire and the water in your body. If the water becomes too much, the fire gets smaller. You don't have enough heat in your body. And then you got overflowing fluids. And if the fire gets too much, then you get dried out and the fluids are depleted and you get dryness and heat symptoms. So from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective, the main cause of dampness is usually excess cold and damp foods. Cold and damp just means moist foods, foods that have a lot of water in them. So like raw vegetables, raw fruits, that kind of thing. Those are the usual, when you read traditional Chinese medicine textbooks, those are the usual things they point at as the main causes of dampness.
It's just funny that, in Western medicine, we criticize acupuncture a lot, and people don't realize that traditional Chinese medicine is a whole system of medicine, a complete body of work. And no Chinese medicine practitioner would tell you, oh, just inserting this stainless steel needle is going to cure you. They have a prescription for diet. They have a prescription for exercise. They have a prescription for proper supplementation of Chinese herbs that works synergistically to achieve a certain effect. And then you do have this subset of acupuncture, which there is a ton of research on acupuncture already. This is 3,000-year-old medicine that had to be explained without microscopes and all this new technology that we have to explain effects at a microscopic level. So they sort of use allegories to explain what was going on with the body.
Yeah, acupuncture is actually only a subset of one of the four major disciplines of traditional Chinese medicine. So that acupuncture is considered part of the external medicine. So that would also include Tui Na or massage and any kind of gua sha, any kind of external treatment. And then you have internal medicine, which is all of your herbal medicine, the whole pharmacopoeia. I mean, 3,000, I think, 3,000 plus herbal constituents. And when I say herbal, of course, it includes not only plants, but also animal components and mineral components. And then, so that's internal medicine. And then, so you got external medicine, internal medicine, and then you got dietetics is a third major branch of traditional Chinese medicine. So that's what to eat, of course. That's enough said about that. And then the fourth is veterinary medicine. So that is, if you were really traditionally a completely trained Chinese medicine physician, you had all four of those specialties. You had some degree of mastery of all four of those specialties.
even into veterinary medicine?
Yeah.
Wow. It's hard enough to master just like the acupuncture side of things. Imagine, being a master herbalist and then, having enough knowledge about the effects of diet on your body, because and that's something that resonates with me when it comes to TCM, is that they are not in any extreme. They look at the person and they try to balance their diet according to what they're presenting. And if you look at like tongue diagnosis or pulse diagnosis, or you can see that there are certain deficiencies, nutrient deficiencies, that do present in the tongue. Like, for example, a B12 deficiency does have does enlarge your tongue. And imagine if thousands of years ago we had practitioners that were looking at all of your body, all of your systems, and then prescribing you a diet that would fix those things. And that is pretty damn impressive.
From my understanding, the Chinese physicians were the first or among the first to identify certain nutrient deficiencies and how to correctly treat them, including iodine deficiency. They were first to identify iodine deficiency, hypothyroidism, and correct treatment of it with sea vegetables. I think thiamine deficiency. They were the first to identify beriberi and how to treat it correctly with animal and plant constituents. So it was actually, going back to what you said earlier, traditional Chinese medicine is basically the world's oldest complete naturopathic medical system.
Yeah, you're right.
All by itself.
And that's what's just so staggering, that that we are, as in the Western medicine, we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole by trying to explain traditional Chinese medicine with technology, and then B, we are trying to teach this complete set of rules and research, and all of the things that they've done in a compressed amount of time, without having the apprentice structure that traditional Chinese medicine had. And that's not even getting into like the barefoot doctors and all these people that had all this huge tradition going from house to house, healing people. And I'm sure you can talk a little bit more about that.
My first response to that, as you're talking, I'm thinking, when you go through school to learn traditional Chinese medicine, basically you just learn what you need to know in order to pass the board exams. You don't really learn what you need to know to practice traditional Chinese medicine. You got a little bit, you got enough to get your foot on the ladder, so to speak. But the majority of what you need to know, you learn when you start really treating patients, a lot of patients. This is one of the reasons why I have always run a relatively low cost clinic, because I want to see a lot of patients. I don't want the cost of the treatment to be a barrier, so that I can see a lot of patients during a day. The more patients I see, the more experience I get, the more skilled I get at diagnosis, and the more I learn. So that's been one of my approaches all along.
So you are working and you are doing all this self-experimentation before biohacking was a thing. And I remember just like looking at my RSS feed, and I stumbled upon a news article that says farewell to paleo. This is back in June of 2011. What happened around that time?
Well, what happened around that time? Again, like I said, none of these things are sudden. Leading up to that time, I had been having some bothersome symptoms that I thought might be associated with the way I was eating the paleo diet, but I didn't know exactly what was needing adjustment. All I could do to try to understand was to read the medical literature, which of course has got a lot of conflicting information in it, right? And try to go on my previous experience and also use the lens of traditional Chinese medicine that I have. So trying to use all of those tools that I had to make sense out of those things. So there were several things that were going on in that same time period. One was that my former wife, Rachel, she had been having a problem with fibrocystic breast disease. And that had been off and on while we were eating paleo, and I couldn't really tell what it was, if it was anything that we were eating that was causing that. And then, but previous to 2011, we separated. We'd already been separated, but we were still in communication. We were co-authors of the book, The Garden of Eating, so we were still working together professionally to some degree. And then I had met my present wife, Tracy, and she wasn't paleo when we first met, but she was very open to it. She had read Cordain's book and so forth. And so she started to eat paleo. Well, I would say paleo-ish because I wasn't eating a Cordain paleo diet at the time, trademarked paleo diet.
Back then it was very fractioned, and that's the beauty about science, that if you make a mistake, you can always go back, and as long as you're backed by science and not by just a change of mind, as a scientist, I will still respect you as long as you can back it up. And that's the beauty, because there were a bunch of paleo people suggesting that we should take mega doses of fish oil. And as the science came in that was not a good idea, a lot of these people that I highly respect posted on their blog saying, you know what, we were wrong. And it may be a better way of delivering this essential fatty acids by eating fish, because those high doses of omega-3 are not making it to the cell. They're actually oxidizing before they get there. And I am completely cool about that, because this is science. This is not religion.
Right. So Tracy started eating paleo, and to condense it down over the course of about 6 to 12 months, I can't remember the exact time period right now, she just gained weight. It didn't work for her in terms of a weight management strategy the way we were doing it at the time. But it was more of a primal diet because I ate a lot of cream. I used some cheese. It wasn't paleo in the sense of dairy free. And when you go back to read the Garden of Eating, my approach wasn't low carbohydrate either. I ate potatoes and sweet potatoes and one of my favorite things to eat when I just felt hungry after a meal was I'd get those date logs and put almond butter on top of it.
So low calorie snacks.
Yeah, low calorie snacks, right? At the time, I didn't think I'm eating too much carbohydrate, because if you go back to the Garden of Eating, I actually made an argument in there that the diet you had to have a certain amount of carbohydrate in your diet based on some of the research showing how it might affect your serotonin levels to be low carbohydrate and your thyroid hormone levels and so forth. So I had the belief at the time that you had to be getting at least, the 150 grams of carbohydrate per day to achieve optimum health.
And back then, there was this mantra, calories don't matter. And the more we learn, and there are still people out there that have that gut feeling that calories don't matter. And through the works of people like Jaminet and people like Stephan Guyenet, and recently Rob Wolf, with his new book, Wired to Eat, they are making a pretty damn strong argument that calories do matter. And in the end, most of these diets that we, first eat real food, second, eat in a way that you're going to be satiated, and then you'll be okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
So then your farewell to paleo, and you basically, almost did a 180. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So because Tracy was gaining weight, and because then she started to develop the cystic breast, and from the knowledge I had of the medical literature at the time, the only thing that I could link it to was saturated fat, high fat diet. I could kind of make sense of that with the traditional Chinese medicine perspective as well, that an excess amount of fat can contribute to dampness if your digestive system is inefficient, and then that can from the Chinese medicine perspective, that contributes to the accumulation of fluids and dampness, and eventually that cooks down over time into cysts and then possibly tumors. And then my former wife, Rachel, got her diagnosis of breast cancer. And again, of course, the literature is replete. The scientific literature is replete with fingers pointing at meat and fat and so forth for breast cancer. So that just that was the direction that my mind started to go. Well, maybe this meat-based approach to paleo is not optimum. So my farewell to paleo was along the lines of, well, I don't think that paleo as it's being presented right now, TM, trademark, highly meat-based, is necessarily the right way to go. So I'm going to try something completely different right now. And I'm going to go back. I'm going to implement what I know or what I have experienced having improved some of these symptoms, which was a very low-fat plant-based diet, which initially wasn't vegan. It was just a low-fat plant-based diet, more macrobiotic-esque, with some fish as the animal food, fish and eggs. And then gradually over time that evolved into attempting a vegan diet again.
And in August of 2011, you gave an interview to Jimmy Moore. And man, like I remember, and this is where this diet journey and how your life can change, because I wasn't a medical student yet. I was preparing to apply. I applied at the end of 2012. And one of the reasons I applied to Arizona is because you were out here. uh, and so I listened to this interview with Jimmy Moore, and man, you are a good bully to have on your side, because you are so damn convincing, and you cross your T's and dot your I's when it comes to reading literature and putting a damn good argument in front of a person. So then you start talking about this, and you went as far as 80-10-10. 80% carbohydrates, 10% protein, 10% fat. How long did you do this for? Again, it's a continuum. It's not like you just woke up one day and said, okay, fuck meat.
Right.
It's a continuum, and you're trying to better yourself. And then you start going a little bit more biased, or whatever you want to call it. And then eventually you find yourself, I'm eating nothing but sprouted rice.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like I said, we started out with a kind of omnivorous, low-fat, plant-based diet, and then I was still, have in the back of my mind the paleo concept, the ancestral eating concept. So, of course, I'm thinking, well, grains and beans weren't necessarily weren't part of pre-agricultural diets for sure. So, if they were eating plant-based, it must have been more of a fruit and or starchy vegetable based, and that kind of sounds like the 80-10-10 low fat plant based approach. And I like fruit. Right. Fruit's easy to eat, right? So, and it's got a lot of on paper anyways, it's got a lot of high levels of certain nutrients, and it's kind of the opposite of a meat-based diet. So at the time I was thinking, well, I did meat for so long, maybe my symptoms are just I got out of balance too far to one side, and then sometimes you have to do something extreme to the other side to bring the body back into balance. So maybe doing a higher fruit, cooling, moistening food diet will bring my body a little bit more back to balance. And interestingly enough, that did seem to have some benefits. I did a video I put on my YouTube channel, and let's see, it was called Basic Macrobiotics YouTube channel, but we discontinued that channel. But I had a like rosacea mark on my root of my nose for the entire time that I was paleo, for as long as I could remember, and it wouldn't go away. Nothing that I could find during paleo to do would change it. And then after I would say about 6 to 12 months of doing a low-fat plant-based diet with a high fruit content, that thing just completely it didn't resolve like that, but it gradually reduced in intensity, and then it disappeared. In normal conditions, it wouldn't be visible at all. When I went in a shower, it would seem to, after a hot shower, it would show up a little bit more.
That histamine
and
release.
Yeah, and then gradually it got to the place where it completely went away. So I really don't know what it was about that approach that made that change, but I was grateful for it because it was getting redder and drier, and it was getting to the place where it might flake a little bit, and it was sometimes a little painful because it was so dry in that spot. But that worked. What worked? I don't know.
Yeah. So then you started blogging and calling out a couple of things on certain paleo personalities. You started talking about like different things that you had discovered. You talked about Ansel Keys and how he had been demonized, and maybe we went a little too hard on him. You talked about a couple of people in the paleo community and their approach. And this is back then. Again, the mantra of calories don't matter. was really loud. We were not paying the really heavy attention on things like omega-3 to omega-6 ratios. Basically, eat as many nuts as you want. We were not talking about sustainability. You eventually, or more recently, you have found through your own self-experimentation back into this space. How did that happen?
Okay, so
And this is fast forward how many years, because we're talking about 2013 now.
yeah, basically, I was plant-based, and then eventually I spent like 5.5 years vegan, no animal product at all. Um, and during that time, I wrote that big book, Powered by Plants, which was my attempt basically to provide, or to see if I could provide a an evolution-based argument for a plant-based diet. And I think that I did a pretty good job, although now I know that I made quite a few mistakes. So what happened was that I don't stop learning, right? I just keep reading. I try to keep up on literature, and also I have my own personal experiences. So one of my lifelong issues to deal with on my personal health has been skin disorders. Sometimes they're psoriasis-like skin disorders, and those things were never improved by my first iteration of paleo. They were kind of stable, but they didn't get better. So I was hoping that when I did plant-based, it was going to get better, because that one like rosacea-like rash did improve, but I never got any improvement with the flaking, itching skin conditions. And towards the end of the most recent years that I did a plant-based diet, one of the rashes that I actually had gotten total relief of after a course of using Chinese herbal medicine and had been gone for more than 15 years. I don't even know. I'd have to do the calculations. It was completely gone. It started to come back. And I was like, something's going wrong, because if that thing's coming back, it never came back when I was paleo, but it was coming back towards the end of the, because I'd gotten rid of it before I was paleo. It was coming back during the plant-based. I was thinking that something's really going wrong in my metabolism now if that thing's coming back. And I also had a lot of dry skin on my elbows, dry and cracking skin on my elbows, and some other places on my instep and so forth. They seem to be getting worse.
Do you have any clue what was causing, like now in retrospect?
What was causing it?
Yeah, what was causing it?
Well, yeah. I wrote on my blog what I think was causing it, and of course I take what I think with a grain of salt. Don't ever believe everything you think. But gradually I became aware of the fact that these kinds of skin conditions can be related to metabolic syndrome. And then I started going back and looking at my previous blood tests, and I was looking at my lipid levels and my blood sugar level. And during my plant-based years, my blood sugar level was gradually creeping up in the high normal range, even though my lipid levels were going down. But my lipid levels, my total cholesterol was going down, and my LDL was going down, but my HDL was staying stagnant or going down. And my triglycerides, they were a lot higher than when I was paleo. So I was thinking that since psoriasis is linked to metabolic syndrome, maybe the reason that these things are getting worse is that I'm gradually developing metabolic syndrome, which the other symptom of which I had was that my waist was staying 3 inches larger than it was when I was in high school. And no matter even if I restricted my calories and tried to lose weight, I couldn't get the waist circumference to go down. It was like I would lose muscle mass or fat otherwise, but my waist circumference would stay at around 33 inches. And I was like, that's not right. when you restrict calories and lose weight, you should be losing weight around your waist as well as other places, not only losing muscle mass. So all those things added up to me thinking, I'm a hypothesis. I am developing metabolic syndrome, a mild form of it, and that may be exacerbating my skin conditions. So I want to do an experiment. So I decided that I'm going to do a low carbohydrate experiment.
So that's super interesting for me, because you know what I thought your answer was going to be? I thought you were going to say grains. You know how they're inflammatory, and whatever, properly prepared grains are better than eating manufactured white bread. And there's plenty of civilizations that have subsided on grains. So there are certain genotypes that are going to thrive on grains. Like, for example, I'm Mexican, and I can eat properly prepared nixtamalized corn till the cows come home, and I don't get anything, like no breakouts or anything. If I eat wheat, I will run to the bathroom and just have diarrhea for the rest of the day, and it will ruin my week. But you were consuming grains, and for some reason I had this idea that maybe when you talked about psoriasis, I always think about the inflammatory effects of grains and how eliminating grains or lactose sometimes fix those things. I never thought about metabolic syndrome. That's very, very interesting, and that's an insight that you had on your own health.
Yeah. And I didn't think of grains because when I got rid of that rash the first time, I was eating a grain-based diet. So because of my experience having had improvements in certain health conditions, because of my own experience, I couldn't hook it up with grains because I got rid of it when I was eating grains. So how could it be grains themselves that's causing the problem? Grains themselves were causing me gut problems, yes, but I wasn't thinking of those for my skin problems.
So then you say, okay, it's time to try this low carb approach. Who did you look for, or how did you guide your own research and your own self experimentation? Did you buy any books, or did you have this notion already?
Yeah, I had already been aware that there are a number of studies showing that doing a low carbohydrate diet is effective for reducing symptoms of metabolic syndrome and changing the lipid and blood sugar levels. And then it was one thing that I hadn't really tried. Okay, I have to add this other thing. The one thing that I had neglected to take account of in all the previous iterations of my diet, back to something we were discussing earlier, calories. So when I was eating a plant-based diet and it was low in calories, my health seemed to improve. But when I ate a plant-based diet and it was adequate calories, my skin health either stayed stagnant or got worse. So that made me realize that how many calories you're eating, of course, affects how the composition of your diet is affecting you. So when you're in a negative energy balance, your body's going to be producing ketones. To some degree, your body's going to be metabolizing more fat, and your blood sugar is going to be a little bit lower because you're in a negative caloric balance. So that made me think, well, yes, there are plenty of studies out there where people lose weight and improve metabolic syndrome on plant-based diets if the plant-based diet is negative calorie balance, hypocaloric. But to my knowledge, there are no studies that show improvement of metabolic syndrome with a plant-based diet when the diet is not hypocaloric. So I didn't want to be on a hypocaloric diet because I don't need to lose weight. I wanted to be on a calorie adequate diet, but also improve my metabolic syndrome. So it seemed to me the only solution for that was to cut down my carbohydrate intake and try to induce more of a ketogenic state, because there are some research showing a highly anti-inflammatory effect of ketosis. And that, to me, that hooked up or resonated with my experience of having anti-inflammatory effects of a plant-based diet when it was hypocaloric. So I started to see that hypocaloric plant-based diet is in many ways similar to a ketogenic diet. And that's one of the things I think that confuses the literature, the medical literature, the nutrition literature, because when you look at a hypocaloric diet, you see an effect of a plant-based diet, but it's hypocaloric. That might not be the effect of a plant-based diet that's not hypocaloric.
But that confounding variable affects every single diet.
Yes.
And this is what I've said this in the past in my podcast. You start a paleo diet, you don't know what to eat because, I just emptied my whole cabinets of all the crap that I've been eating for decades. So now you're eating a fried egg and some broccoli for breakfast. So you are automatically self-selecting yourself for a low-calorie diet. And then you start getting so excited because you're feeling better, you're losing weight. You start looking at all these beautiful recipes on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and now you're making paleo chocolate cake, paleo donuts, paleo pizza,
Right.
and now, sure, they are less inflammatory than the counterpart, but now you're going back to hypercaloric state. You start gaining weight, and then you're like, oh shit, paleo didn't work for me. I'm going back to whatever I was doing before, or worse. I have this thought, that, for example, you eat a piece of bread, just a regular piece of bread made with sprouted wheat. Okay, so gluten is a protein that is satiating, that is that is lowering glycemic index, and it's going to eventually maybe have less calories than if you eat a gluten-free piece of bread, because now you're taking the gluten, which is protein, out of the bread, and now you're eating something that is going to have a higher glycemic index, less protein, less satiating, but it's paleo, quote unquote.
Right.
So you make this idea, in your head that because it's gluten-free is good for you. Sure, it might be less gut irritation, which is important, but you cannot just go into a processed paleo diet and expect good results. So this is not only for vegan diet that is hypocaloric. It's for every diet. When you switch from your standard American diet, your SAD diet, to any form of eating, you're self-selecting for calorie restriction.
Yes. Yeah. Almost always that's true. When people adopt a new diet, the main thing is what you said. They don't know how to do it, so they almost always end up eating less than they were eating before, and it biases their initial experience. That's one of the major things that I learned the hard way over and over with all my experimentation. What I wanted to do was find a way to eat either eucaloric or hypercaloric that would have the same anti-inflammatory results, if such a thing exists.
Ain't that the holy grail,
So, at the same time, in addition, of course, my wife Tracy's doing all of this with me, and when we were eating plant-based, it was just hard for her to eat eucaloric. It really was. She would overeat. Whatever it is about the plants, is it the high glycemic index or the low protein content? What is it? I can't identify. I don't think I can necessarily identify it right now. But she's just hungrier when she's eating only plants than when we eat a higher meat diet.
It's like we're evolutionary programmed to have no satiety when we eat fruit, like that fructose, does something to our brain where we don't have any satiety and we can eat apples all day long.
Yeah, so Tracy found it very hard to be eucaloric on a vegan diet. So her weight started creeping up over time, and she's a very small, petite woman. She's barely 5 feet tall. So if she gains 2 pounds or 3 pounds, there's not a lot of space. So it shows up, you know, she's very good barometer of whether the diet is keeping you lean or not. Um, and that was contributing to my desire to experiment again. I was sitting in my clinic. We were having lunch in our clinic on our lunch hour one day. I'm sitting there eating, I think it was brown rice and beans or something, and I'm mulling all this stuff is in my mind. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do in the background, and I'm suddenly remembered Ray Audette's book. He said that, you know, the ideal diet is what you could achieve in nature if you were just naked with a sharp stick. And he also said nature is the absence of technology. He said nature is the absence of technology. And suddenly it came to me, I think the thought was, nature is not the absence of technology, because you can find chimps using tools, the crows using tools, whatever. All kinds of animals use tools. Not to the degree of humans, but we're not the only tool users. But what we are is the only idea users. Nature is the absence of ideas, ideology. So actually, a lot of the research that I had done for the Powered by Plants contributed to my having this insight. The idea that came to me was, okay, so here I am eating grains and beans because I think it's good for me. I think it's the right thing for me to do. Remember, I said, never believe anything you think. I was like, wait a minute, what would I eat if I went by what tastes good to me, but only foods that I could get absent human intervention? So only the foods that are available in nature without human interference, like agriculture or breeding or anything like that. What would I eat? What would I reject just because I don't like it? It doesn't taste good to me. And that contributed to my, I was sitting there eating a bowl of grains and beans, and I said I would eat meat. Because I don't really enjoy grains and beans that much compared to meat tastes better to me. So then that's when I started thinking, you know, humans are the only animals who are confused about what to eat. Every other animal just eats what is natural for it to eat. The humans are totally tied up in their brains or their minds about how to eat.
You know, and then we fuck it up for the animals because, like, for example, we grab cows and we give them grains, and the poor cow doesn't even know what to do. So the other day, I was at Whole Foods and I'm on the checkout. There's a bag of vegan jerky, and I'm like banging my head against the conveyor belt because I'm like, what? Okay, you're vegan for a reason. You know, whatever your reason, whether it's emotional, whether you want to save the animals, whether you think it's the healthy. Why would you texturize tofu, put some chemicals in order to make it taste smoky and make it chewy, and then eat that? You know, it makes no sense. It's like they feel guilty about eating animals, but they still want to eat jerky. I want to make human flavored jerky, because I feel really guilty about eating humans, but I still want to do it.
Right. Well, that was I blogged about this several times because I was curious about what's going on in my mind that I'm thinking this about this idea that we shouldn't eat animals, and what goes on in the minds of vegetarians in general. So I read this book, Some We Love, Some We Hate, and Some We Eat. I don't remember the author's name, but he's a psychologist, and he's spent quite a few years studying vegetarians and their thought processes around eating a vegetarian diet. And that book was very enlightening to me. He's got a blog on Psychology Today. He blogged about research showing that it's like 84% of vegetarians go back to eating meat. And Of course, vegetarians give their own reasons, like health, uh, social difficulties, blah, 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 whatever. But to me, it became very significant that 84% of vegetarians go back to eating. So then what came to me was the idea of selection, natural selection. Who continues on a vegan diet or vegetarian diet and continues to promote it as the way to eat, the one that made the best way to achieve health? The people who do that are the ones who achieve better health on a vegan diet. The ones who don't achieve better health on a vegan diet, they just give it up. They go back to eating meat, right? So like everything else, humans always distribute on a bell curve. So on that bell curve, there are going to be a small percentage of people who actually do well on a vegan diet, or well enough that they feel that they can continue it. And then there's going to be a big percentage of people who try it, and for varying lengths of time. Some might only do it for a day or 2 or 3 days, and they feel like terrible, and then they go back to eating meat. And then some people like myself might do it for 3 or 4 years or 5 years or whatever, and then come to a place where they just don't feel well anymore, and they decide they're going to go back to eating meat. It's so I came to the idea that a vegetarian or vegan diet is a selection process, just like anything else. Like basketball is a selection process. Who's in the professional leagues of basketball? The people who are tall, have all the skills and physical characteristics that make them suited to basketball. So who are the people like McDougall and Grieger and all of those people? They're just the people who do best on a low-fat, plant-based diet. And because of an error in human cognitive processes, they think because they do okay or well on it, everybody else will do well on it. But that's like the professional basketball player saying, because I'm really good at playing basketball, everybody else should be good at playing basketball too.
How come you can't dunk, dude? I'm 5'11". You're 7 foot tall.
Right, exactly. So they have physical. There's no doubt that because of the distribution of characteristics, genetically based characteristics, some people are going to do better and some people worse on those diets.
That's pretty, eye-opening. I want to go back a little bit because, I can overeat fat to no avail. Like I don't have a sweet tooth, but I can sit down and eat a pork shoulder, with the nice crispy skin, and I can eat that. And then if I eat a lot of fiber, that like my leptin receptors get activated, and I kind of like get full faster. It's funny how your wife, Tracy, has like the opposite effect where she has to eat more calories on a vegan diet. It's so funny how different humans function differently.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. And that's where I briefly came up with this idea that we started thinking that humans really need to be re-educated to trust trust your true nature, meaning your sensory organs are designed to lead you towards what's best for you. So if you're sitting down and eating something and it might taste good at first, and then when it becomes distasteful to you, that's when you should stop eating it. If it doesn't taste good to you at all from the beginning, that's when you shouldn't start eating it, right? Because your sense organs, if they have been evolved through natural selection to lead you towards what's optimum for improving your health and your reproductive success, then they should be reliable, as they are for all other species, to lead you towards what is your optimal diet.
So, Don, what's your optimal diet now?
What's my optimal diet now?
What'd you have for breakfast?
What I'm doing right now is an experiment, and I am not claiming that it's the last thing that I'm going to do. I'm just experimenting with this. But what I had for breakfast, which is working very well for me right now, particularly in one of my goals, is to realize my full physical potential, Right now I'm working on strength training intensively, and this has been working very well. And so the first thing I trained this morning for about an hour, and right after the training I have this elixir. I have a cup of vegetable juice with a tablespoon of desiccated liver powder and a teaspoon of cod liver oil. That's the first thing I have. And then while I'm digesting that, I make a blender drink. And this morning, that blender drink consisted of 1 cup of half and half and 4 raw eggs, whole eggs. And because I have some on hand, 25 grams of whey protein. But I don't consider that essential. I'm just using that up because I have it on hand. The essential part for me is the 4 raw eggs and the half and half. So I've become, part of this is tuning into what my ancestral diet is. So my background is German, French, and Hungarian, mostly Hungarian. But all of my ancestors were meat eaters, dairy eaters. In his book Germania, the Roman historian Tacitus described the diet of the Germans at the time, which was 100 AD or something like that. It consisted of wild fruit, dairy products, and wild game meat. So I'm kind of dialing in along that. Like there are certain fruits that I have no problem with, mostly stone fruits and melons, berries, the things that are closer to wild fruits.
Yeah, lower glycemic.
And lower glycemic. Some apples and pears, but things like dates and bananas and that kind of thing, more tropical type. That's not really part of my ancestral heritage. Those I don't think I do as well with. It seems the fruits that are lower in fructose I do better with. And research does tend to indicate that wild fruits are higher in glucose and lower in fructose. And then dairy products and meat. So right now that's my experiment. It's only an experiment. We'll see.
What about Tracy? How is her diet being stratified? Is she eating the same thing as you?
Her diet is similar right now. So I just did my body fat percentage. It's 10% according to the 7 skinfold caliper test. And by the 7 skinfold caliper test, Tracy is now 15% body fat, which is at the bottom. I don't think she can go lower than that.
You know, like you and me know that, you know, it's a bell curve, and after you go a certain point, you might be too skinny.
Right. But anyways, what works for her, whereas I do pretty well on intermittent fasting, it turns out that Tracy doesn't do that well on intermittent fasting. She needs to eat more frequently, smaller meals, and also higher protein and a little lower in fat than what I do. I mean, relative, it's not as much. She doesn't eat as much total absolute numbers, as much total protein as I do, but her diet is skewed a little bit higher in protein and lower in fat. And what she's found is that maximum of 50 grams per day of carbohydrate works for her. Once she goes over about 50 grams of carbohydrate per day, even if it's from whole foods, her appetite she just gets more hungry and eats more.
What about you? How many carbs are you doing?
My carbohydrate ranges from about 40 grams per day to about 100 grams per day.
Depending on activity levels. And
Yeah. Usually on the days that I train, I'll eat more carbohydrate on those days, and on the when I do heavy training, and on the other days, I'll eat lower carbohydrate.
You know, Don, any parting words? You know, I'm so glad you're back eating meat, and hopefully continue just showing you the level of expertise in writing for research that you have. You know, it's so exciting when I started seeing you again and commenting on like eating more fat, and you know, I was like, that's pretty cool.
No, thanks. I may rewrite that book, Powered by Plants, but it won't be called Powered by Plants anymore. Because like one of the things that contributed to my change was finding that some of the things I wrote in that book, more recent research since I wrote that book, research has come out showing that some of the things that I came to conclude in that book, like the stomach acid level of humans is more like that of herbivores, that turns out to be completely false. The research now shows that stomach acid levels of humans are more like those of scavenger birds. So very high stomach acid. So if I find time, I will be updating that book.
I'm gonna give you an idea for a name. Powered by Food.
Powered by Food, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, because that way you don't have to change the name ever again.
Right. Good idea. Right now, I'm kind of concentrating on a project that I have. So I have a YouTube channel now, currently called the Full Range Strength channel. Full Range Strength on YouTube. And a website, fullrangestrength.com. Those are my current focused projects outside of my acupuncture and Oriental medicine practice. So I'm starting a project, a 12-month project that's to see how much improvement I can make in my strength and muscle mass over the next 12 months using the type of diet that I'm eating right now and my high intensity strength training system.
So if people in the valley of Arizona, in the Phoenix area, want to come be your patient, or they want to talk to you about, diet and exercise, how can people get a hold of you?
Well, you could get a hold of me through my office phone number is 602-954-8016 if you want to make an appointment. You can also go to my website. It's www.barefoot-acupuncture.com, which, by the way, I came up with that name because of the barefoot doctor. It's Chinese medicine, barefoot doctor tradition. So those are ways you could get in contact with me. I'm on Facebook, of course, just my name, Don Matez. And I have Full Range Strength Facebook page as well. Then there's my blog, Vital Wisdom. It's still semi-active. I post there off and on, although I'm planning over time to phase that out and focus on my website, because my blog is a blogger blog. And I just want to be independent completely, have all my writing on my own website.
Thank you so much for giving me this interview. There's so much bias in science and nutrition, in the science of nutrition. And just to have someone that has gone through the whole ranks and, self-experimented and not ashamed to come out and just tell your story, that's just fantastic. Thank you so much, Don. Thanks for the interview.
Thank you, Guillermo, for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity. I don't ever claim perfection. I'm just an evolving individual like everybody else, doing the best I can to realize my full physical, mental, and spiritual potential. That's my goal. And to share with other people anything that might be useful to them. So maybe I'll see you at a meetup.
Oh yeah. We'll see each other soon enough. Thank you so much, Don.
Thank you. Bye-bye.